Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we are joined by my favorite Norwegian, Einar Tangen, a senior fellow at the Teihe Institute in Beijing and also a senior fellow at the CIGI. So welcome back to the program.
Always a pleasure, Glenn. I am amazed, as I was saying earlier, at your productivity and the breadth and width of your inquiries. I don't take myself seriously. I take issues seriously, and I really appreciate the fact that you do the same.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Well, the reason I really wanted to speak with you today is this massive changes as we see now. I would say a post-Western world being constructed, yeah, as we speak, because as the US and its European allies continue to struggle with economic problems, unsustainable debt, the weaponization of economic dependence, it's becoming obvious that the whole economic system organized around one center of power, that is the liberal hegemon, as it's referred to, has come to an end already. And what will replace it? Well, we're now seeing the leaders of the non-Western world meeting in China. Ideally, would also have more representative of the Western world. But they're now meeting in China to build this new post-Western international economic architecture. And indeed, most of the focus seemed to be on three of the fourth largest economies in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, which is China, India, and Russia, which have all come now seemingly more together than they have ever been. So, so the world is now trying to make sense of this and also assess the significance of what is actually happening. So this is why I really wanted your take. So I guess, to start off with a very wide question, what are you reading into the significance of this massive meeting we now saw in China?
Well, it's been a long time coming. All the comments you made, I agree with. There is a deterioration, but kind of like vinyl and cassette tapes, they kind of appear like they're going away, and then they kind of come back. These are trends, but what we're witnessing now is really all due to Donald Trump. Many people here in China, and I've talked to people in Russia and other places, and they said the greatest gift to China and Asia has been Donald Trump. They could never anticipate anybody who, actually drive a new world order simply by his, kind of unilateral, no end game practices. If you had asked anybody 2 years ago if this was possible, everyone would have said, no, Donald Trump will never be reelected. A, B, this idea that he would alienate neighbors, allies, neutral parties, and then invigorate his opposition. People were thinking about it. They said, "Oh no, he'll run on a domestic agenda. He'll, anti-immigration. We can see that, but he'll leave the financial aside alone for the most part because he's a market guy. He's a businessman. He's supposed to pay attention to that. And what if he did any of the things that we've seen him done? If he 2 years ago said, no, that's crazy talk. You just don't like Donald Trump. But the fact is, he has done it, and the repercussions are that countries are fleeing for an alternative. Yes, you send out 180 letters saying that you're going to put tariffs on countries. Why are you surprised that you're isolated? How is it possible that you can unilaterally reshape the world in the midst of the world going multipolar? It's kind of like that old story of the emperor who's almighty and he thought he could stop the tide. So he sat there demanding that the tide be stopped. And of course, he drowned. And this is, apocryphal in terms of where Donald Trump is going. So right now, that the negative side is he's pushing something which has been happening for a long time. It wasn't just under him. Biden was also, kind of a softer side of we will impose um, Western hegemonic values on the rest of the world. But it isn't working. The economics are there. All countries, as you pointed out, the West have they're collapsing under tremendous amounts of debt. They're not competitive in terms of their manufacturing. And instead of doubling down on what they're good at, which is, educational institutions, the ability to innovate, they're seemingly turning their back on that and, pursuing this kind of false hope that low margin manufacturing and industrialization will somehow save the day. If that were to happen, I think China and many other countries would be very happy because they would seize the high margin future, which is in the digital economy, and they would be the ones who would be winning. So, I mean, none of it makes sense, but it is happening, and it's not just it's not just something. Oh, yeah, wait, this is a reaction purely to Trump. So many of the things that we're seeing now have been in the works, especially over the last 20 years. And it has a lot to do with China's leadership. And I'm not saying that to be pro-China. I'm just simply saying that their economic success has led to a situation where people look to them as a model for development. And then on top of that, they've been putting together this kind of rhetoric package that talks about a shared future. It talks about principles, talks about resurrecting a global order where security, development, respect for sovereignty are put at their forefront. That sounds a lot better than I'm going to tell you what to do and you better like it. And if you don't like it, I'll just take more.
Well, I'm wondering though how much is only about Trump because often, the theory of political economy some theories would suggest that the US was only able to play the benign hegemon due to the massive concentration of economic force when there was a natural gravitation force towards the United States to facilitate these common goods, if you will. But everyone kind of assumed, well, not everyone, many assumed that once the US was in relative decline, it wouldn't be able to generate trust anymore. That in order to be the only center of power, they would have to keep other powers down. So they would have to start to abuse this administrative control over the international economy. Now, I'm not going to downplay Trump's policies and this tariff war on the tariff war on the world has been a disaster. But again, I'm thinking the things that preceded him, the tech war against China, stealing the sovereign funds of Russia, taking over gold reserves, hijacking Iranian oil tankers, restricting access to SWIFT banks. I mean, a lot of limitations technologies. A lot of this is not only Trump, of course. I think Trump took all of this on steroids to play the strongman. But the reason I bring it up is this seems in Europe a lot of the goal is let's wait Trump out. But isn't it likely that the US would follow on this path after he's gone? I'm thinking of context also of the SEO and what's happening in the east of these economies coming together, because it doesn't seem like they're just preparing like the Europeans to wait out Trump. It appears that they are more or less preparing for maybe downfall of the US is too strong. Let's say relative decline at least, or the end of the hegemonic moment.
Well, yeah, I'd say the relevance is dissipating. I completely agree with what you said. The way I was framing it is that Donald Trump is an accelerant. That what he has done has, in essence, speeded up that rush towards the cliff that a lot of Western economies were doing. I mean, remember, all of these economies for the last 600 years have been based on a model of empire. That means that anytime there's a problem at home, or if you want to get rich, you go somewhere else and you take what they have. I always use the example of India, 24% before the British came, 4% when the British left. So clearly you can see the pattern there. And this is not just true. It was true everywhere that they went. Now that model has declined. And sustaining this kind of wealth doesn't even make sense. You have 15% of the population enjoying a relatively high life while the rest of the world is sunk. And then in 2000, early 2000s, you have a break. The comes along, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity for developing and emerging economies to come forward, to be part of the global economy, mostly because they offered low cost production. And then now you're seeing this rug pull. The US has said, oh, wait a second, that was too good for you guys. It wasn't good enough for us, despite the fact that if you look at global profits during the same period from 2000 until today, two-thirds of the profits were flowing to Europe and America. So this idea that it wasn't good for them, no, it wasn't good for the American people at large, but it was very good for the very wealthy who made tremendous amounts of money at this time, and that's why it's unsustainable. So we are in complete agreement about that. I just like to emphasize that Trump is an accelerant. In terms of everything that else is happening, this has been happening for a long time. That's why I was referring to the fact that in earlier stages, you've seen Xi Jinping comes along, he starts talking and using this language about shared future. And let's see here, I'm a country in Africa or South America, and I have a stark choice. I can go with a country that says, look, I believe in a shared future in which I respect your sovereignty, we do trade, and we encourage the security of your country, right? Not at the expense of other country. Versus, you're a small country, I'm going to take stuff from you and you're going to like it. And if you don't like it, I have a military card. And in the past, I've instituted 72 known, change of, of governments. How many unknown, we don't know, of course. And that's a real palpable threat. So, these countries have been voting with their feet. You can see it in terms of central banks. How much are they investing in the U.S.? Almost all of them, except for Japan and Great Britain, have been selling down their U.S. assets. The bond market now, T-bills in the United States, is now being supported by private hot money flows, people who are looking for what they think are safe returns, right? U.S. Treasuries, those are the gold standard, right? But here's the problem. At the same time that Donald Trump has been pulling all these shenanigans, he's also been saying, look, I want to devalue the US dollar by 30%. Well, that means if I buy $100 worth of, I take my currency, buy $100 worth of US Treasury bills, and he goes through with it, I have $70 worth of Treasury bills. And if I want to return it back into my own currency, doesn't sound like a good deal, doesn't sound very safe. So in order to combat that, I'm going to say, well, I will buy those T-bills, but I need a higher rate, a rate that ensures that I will keep my my profits, right, and also my capital during that period. So this is extremely dangerous to a country that has $27 trillion in debt and is at over 120% of GDP in terms of its debt. We're using $1 trillion right now, about a $6 trillion budget. But keep in mind, on that $6 trillion, we are already borrowing on a regular basis $2 trillion. Means that we're not keeping up with, our expenses. In addition to that, we're just piling it on top of our existing debt. And then on top of that, to finance that debt, we're using a larger and larger portion of what is remaining of our budget. And then you add on the military, it is not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. I don't care how much, if you take all the money away from the universities, $80 billion, doesn't matter if you take out a couple of $100 billion from U.S. involvement overseas, whether it's the United Nations or whatever. At the end of the day, there's just not enough money to actually provide governance and also there's debt and the military. So countries are looking at that. The sophistication level over the last 20, 25 years has grown considerably. People who are in these nations have attended top schools around the world. They're no longer neophytes trying to figure out what's going on. They have their hand on the pulse of things. They see the reality. And this has also been an accelerant as these countries vote with their feet. They're obviously going to go to a model that respects their sovereignty, where they have development path and they are secure. They're not going to go towards some hegemon who isn't promising to deliver anything, only take.
Well, it does seem to most that it is predictable that this model has reached a dead end. But this is why it's also strange to me. There's no doesn't seem to be much recognition of this within the West and the need for considering other alternatives. Because as you see now, yeah, the global majority meeting in China to try to rebuild an alternative economic architecture, the reactions from the West has been very hostile. The EU foreign policy chief, the Kaya Kallas, she said that this was a threat to the rules-based order. In the German media, one of the papers called this the summit of villains. So, because the liberal democratic West had decided not to attend, and so it's not legitimate unless we're there. The U.S. In the U.S. you had Trump tweeting out that they were conspiring against America, and later on he also said that without America the world would die. So, but does this have to be bad news for the West, though? Because if we do recognize that the current economic order is running into a brick wall at a massive speed, and we don't have any plan B that doesn't entail more debt and weaponizing economic dependence to stay on top, uh, wouldn't it be a better idea to join in, I guess, and participate in the you call it restructuring of the economic architecture? After all, if the West isn't participating in it, it looks like what's going to emerge is not going to be very favorable to the West, at least without significant participation. I don't know. It's just if we look at the deals which were made, for me, one of the most significant, if not the most significant, was this gas deal between the Chinese and the Russians. This was a massive chunk of the Yamal fields in the Arctic, which was gas intended for Europe, which is now being redirected to China instead. It's just one disaster after another, and I just don't see, as things goes from bad to worse in the West, that what is the alternative to discussing an international economic system that isn't organized all around the United States?
Well, everything you talked about, I mean, the economic gravity is clearly against the West and their idea that they can hold everything static and that it'll go back somehow to the good old days. The problem is internal. It's a psychology. If you believe that if that the world depends on America, or that anybody who has a meeting that you're not part of are villains, obviously that has to do with your global outlook, your assumptions. So nothing changes in America or Europe until there's a change in the elites who are running things. And right now, we don't see that. You see clear challenges coming from the right. Marie Le Pen, although she's out, her movement is still going forward. You have AfD in Germany, and across the board, you have these conservative movements who are taking up the space that's being vacated by elites who seem completely out of touch with the fact that their people they represent are hurting, have no future, and yet they continue to support a system that is, as you put it, running towards a wall or a cliff. So, yeah, no, I mean, I keep asking this question. "Oh, so what's the solution?" I said, there is no solution until somebody says, okay, I recognize what the reality is. When you're talking to somebody who's delusional, trying to be rational, doesn't work at all. Now, they would say this exact same opposite. This is, oh, Glenn and Einar, they're delusional. They believe in this kind of stuff that, it'll all work out. This is nonsense. The world needs adults in the room like Europe and America to run things, because these savages really, they seem like they've, progressed, but the fact is they can't do it without us. All right. And I've heard that before. All right. And you'll hear it again until reality is at the door. There's, like I said, political changes, but those political changes will be costly. along with the right-wing parties, don't necessarily just bring happiness. They also bring a large part of divisiveness. They're against immigrants. They want to go back to conservative politics. Things that will, kind of curtail the freedoms that they say that they're currently denied. And this is an age-old story. So yeah, it looks grim until there is a real change in how people think about what the opportunities are. I mean, I was discussing this and like something my grandmother always told me came back to me. She says, look, creativity is seeing opportunities where others see obstacles. Right now in the West, they see only obstacles. Right now, the rest of the world sees opportunities.
Well, this is, I often made that point as well with all this technological platforms developing out of China. You're having this Arctic corridor through Russia, land corridors. You have all these new things coming up with a lot of exciting opportunities. But it does appear that everything is seen through the prism of a threat, because all of this development, all these opportunities to form better relations, they all would result in, and at least entail, the recognition that the unipolar moment's done, that it's not the center of the world anymore. But at some point, it's not a choice. You do have to recognize the world as it is if you want to make the best decisions. But I think what's often disturbed, at least in Europe, was there was a lot of excitement when the US used its economic weapon against adversaries, even though this would also reduce trust in the US-centric economic system. But what is a bit new under Trump, though, is using it so aggressively against friendly countries as well. That is, well, against the Europeans themselves, which they're very upset about. But I wanted to focus on India, because this, I think, was very significant in terms of what's happening now. They went from 25% tariff and then 50% against India, unless they would do as they're told, that is, buy more American energy, weapons, cut off relations with the countries America doesn't want India to trade with, now primarily Russia, and essentially make themselves excessively dependent on the United States, which would translate, I guess, into less economic prosperity and more political dependence. Not ideal if you want to be a great power. But how do you make sense of this? Because everyone knew that and had warned that the Russians were being pushed into the hands of the Chinese, which is not, I don't see why this would be a bad thing. I think it would stabilize many regions in the world, like Central Asia. But now, of course, the alienating India, which truly, genuinely wanted to have a balance of dependence, that is, to work with the Americans and the Chinese. They don't want to pick a side. And now they were strong-armed into going to India and going to China and trying to make peace there. How do you make sense of, I guess, these recent developments with India?
Well, I've been on 30 Indian television shows this week, representing about 7 or 8 of their television stations. And I can tell you, it's not so much what I say, it has a lot more to do with the kind of questions that they have. And they're similarly grouped. They don't, they first off say, look, this is hypocritical. The U.S. increased its buying of yellow cake and rare and strategic metals and fertilizers from Russia by 28% last year. China buys more oil than we do. Right? Europe is the main destination for the products, the oil products that we are refining and sending there. Turkey also buys oil. All right. So why are we being singled out? And this seemed to be a refrain. They cast themselves as a victim. And the problem is they don't know why. Jay Shankar has been, his son was with the Heritage Foundation. And that because of kerfuffle, he went back to India. He's an American citizen, but he's now running a think tank that is funded by Reliance, which is one of the big, powerful families there. He has always been very, very pro-United States, but not so happy with Russia. He was the ambassador here before. Anyway, for whatever reason, he saw India strategically linked to the United States, and that this would be the best way to play off what they saw as a regional neighbor that was growing very quickly, that was infringing on, quote, areas of historical influence that India had. And this is true, but rather than trying to engage with China, their mindset was, we will play a game. We will try to extract value from both the United States and also China. So flash forward, you know, first term of Trump, it was howdy modi. It was huge, crowds at Madison Square Garden, adoring fans, photo ops, all of this type of stuff. So when the second time came around, there were many, many people who favored Trump. They said, well, he's our friend. He's going to take care of us. This special relationship is going to go forward. Instead, Trump turned. Now, people are pointing to the oil, and that certainly helps a lot of the very wealthy families, Adani, Ambani, etc. But the real issue was this opening up the dairy and farm agriculture. India still has 50% of its people in farming. You take away their livelihood, there will be a change in government. And it's not just at the next election. It will be fast. It will be furious. These people will not vote for a government that literally that takes away their ability to sell. I mean, they're already impoverished. These are not rich farming families. They had a lot of kids. They could end up keep dividing the land. There's stories about, farmer suicides in literally the hundreds every week. You have people taking on crushing debt that is passed on from generation to generation. This is a red line in Indian politics. So there is that. And then there are other things out there that Modi could not understand. One being that the U.S. interfered in the general election, where he was hoping to have a vast majority in the House, in the lower and upper houses, so that he could change India into something that was more centralized. Currently, it's a very strong provincial government, slightly weaker national government, but it makes it very difficult to have standardized policies in order to create change, as every province protects its own. But they don't care what the cost is to the country as long as they're able to extract value locally. So that was a huge issue. Felt a sense of betrayal. After that, he went and had a big toothy grin and hug with Putin. That did not sit well in Washington. All of a sudden, Bangladesh comes into play. A color revolution that the people in India believe was financed and pushed by the U.S. results in a government that is no longer friendly to India. Then you have this issue about, Trump claiming that he settled a war between Pakistan and India. Regardless of the reality, the fact is India vehemently denies this. This is a direct attack on Modi in the sense that he has told people, India stands strong and proud. I'm your leader. No one intercedes between us. We are in charge. We won that war. Right. So Trump repeats that almost every couple of days, and his insistence on getting a Nobel Peace Prize. Look, I settled this war between India and Pakistan. Never, not to mention 6 other wars, which are unfortunately still going on, despite all the peace efforts he's done. And then, the 50% tariffs. They were stunned, literally stunned. They could not figure out why the U.S. is attacking them, insisting on things politically that cannot be done, embarrassing their leader, and then looking like they're trying to drive him to the courthouse. So, Modi originally went over there, and I talked to people, obviously, 30 shows. A few of them were on this opinion that India's best course of action was to use the panda or the dragon against the eagle. in essence, trying to, say, oh, look, we'll get friendly with China unless you back off, Washington, telling Washington to back off. But, a funny thing happened on the way to Beijing. You saw the optics. Those were real. Xi, Modi, Putin laughing. I mean, small group, informal. Contrast that with, the European leaders who are being dragged into Trump's office, and they sat like a bunch of either people from the press or a classroom listening to the great professor. No real sense of respect or bonhomie other than, the occasional attempt at trying to, praise his power, to flatter him in order to steal more time so they quote, as you put it, they can outlast Trump. So India doesn't understand it. On the way over there, things happened. And the reason I say that is 2 months before, the Indian representative walked out because the group would not sign on to as anti-terrorism things, which was aimed directly at Pakistan. This time around, India did sign. All right. They gloss over the fact that the paper actually said that everybody is against all terrorism. There's no good terrorism or bad terrorism. There's been a lot of questions about the hypocrisy on the Indian side, because on one hand, they insist that what happens to Indians is an act of terrorism. But, in Balochistan, where many, many more people have been killed, including recently, a bus being stopped and 20 some odd men being executed on the side of the road, that there wasn't a peep out of India claiming that this was terrorism. And in fact, one colonel tried to justify it by saying, look, what we do is good. What they do, has nothing to do with us. That's a bunch of freedom fighters. And, that has nothing to do with India. Trying to make this, what I call a spurious argument that there's good terrorism and bad terrorism. I don't agree. He obviously thinks otherwise. So the situation is very complicated, but you clearly see that India, if they went there with this idea that they were going to leverage Beijing to Washington as a kind of plank for Washington, that has probably disappeared. It also made a lot of sense. I mean, they had Indian side thinking, especially when they announced this huge gas deal. Literally, this is it's almost going to double what they currently have. They have 12 billion whatever's in one pipeline. They have 44 in another. This is 50. All right. It represents right now, Russia's around 12% of China's use. Why is that important to know? Because pipe gas is less expensive than gas that has to be compressed, put on special ships, sent there, decompressed, and then put into systems. Obviously, there's an energy cost to all that as well, in addition to the dollars and the specialized equipment. So pipe gas is always better. Now, by literally doubling that, if it happens, and this will take years to bring to fruition, there's a number of issues that are still remaining, and that goes to the economics of it. They have not agreed on pricing or a pricing formula, and this is absolutely crucial. Obviously, Russia doesn't want to build a pipeline and then not be able to use it, and China wants to get a price that they think is going to represent a value against the market. So they still have to agree with that. It still has to be built. Chinese are obviously experts at large projects, as we've seen. So they can do it quickly, but it hasn't been built yet, and there are still details out there. But if it happens, all of a sudden, Russia is supplying 23% of China's natural gas. Huge amount. And it's in an area which is on their borders between the two countries. Cannot be interfered with. It is not subject to the Malacca Straits or any of the other Straits of Hormuz or any other geopolitical area where a third party can exert pressure. Very, very, very important. Now, Why did I say this affects India? All of a sudden, India realizes that they're a lot closer to Russia in sources of energy, which they need, than they are to the U.S. And what they see as outrageous demands. Now, going back to something you said earlier about don't understand. People are trying to figure out the Trump thing. It's fine to say you're going to outlast Trump, but the question is, since he's been elected twice, and not successively, elected, not elected, elected, does he represent the bookends changing? Has America, as you put it, has gone so far down the path that its leaders in the future are just still going to be hurtling towards, brick walls or cliffs? And right now, I believe most of the world believes that the United States is on a trajectory which is not going to be nation friendly to the rest of the world.
Well, I want to ask, I guess my last question more about the military dimension of what we saw, because, well, the SEO meeting was about mostly about economics and political cooperation. That being said, after this meeting, the Chinese, they celebrated the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japan in World War II. And again, China displayed a lot of new weaponry. Uh, Again, I'm not a military guy. I can't. Was in the army, but I haven't assessed the. I don't have the skills to assess the different weaponry. I was wondering, what do we know of? Was there any surprises in terms of what China could, could show off?
All right, I want to digress one short moment to the SCO. I want people to keep in mind that all the words they heard at the SCO are, in essence, the same vocabulary that's being used at the Belt and Road Initiative and also at BRICS. So when China also talked about this um, global governance initiative, that's the fourth leg that is dropped, because before they had the security, which I talked about, they had the development, but they had this civilization, which I equate to respect and sovereignty. And now they're saying, okay, you bring all these together, and what we need to do is reform the UN to make it reflective of what is necessary for the world. And this has had a very, very positive response internationally, but it's all been step by step. And you can, I started tracing back when these, the terms were being converged, where they were using these exact same words and phrases at these different institutes. And it's been about basically since time one, since they started talking about these initiatives, they have put a framework of vocabulary together, which they use. So this is very, very much step by step. They're going in a clear direction. And that direction is that the UN as it stands today isn't working. Not that anybody would say that it is, uh, who's rational. Um, but, what do you do about it? That's the part where China is consistently winning, is they have a plan. It's not, they have a goal, plan, and they have the ability to actuate that plan. And that is very important. Now, I digress. We'll get back to the military. A lot of it is how you frame this. If you go on to Western media, this was a threat. This is a reason for Europe and America to spend more money catching up to China. And I'm sure the military industrial complex is just thrilled that they saw this parade, because there are so many toys that they don't have. And now they're going to be looking for funding. They say, oh, look, see, this is why you have to give me, $2 trillion so that, I can take care of this threat for you. But if you start looking at it from China's perspective, after 80 years, after the defeat of a fascistic regime that killed 36 million people, now keep in mind, the total estimate of death was 100 million total from the Second World War. 36 in China, 27 or just under 27 in Russia. That gives you an idea of who actually suffered. America, there's no such thing as comparing the suffering, saying, oh, well, a lot of people suffered. That's worse than one person suffering. It isn't. Suffering in this instance, every person whose life is snuffed out because of this, who had family, who had a life, who had energy, that is a crime. It's regrettable. It can never be put back right. But this idea that the West had put out that somehow it was the West that suffered and sacrificed, it's not true. You can see that clearly by the numbers. So 80 years hence, what do you see in the world? We see in Gaza the same fascistic language, the ability of monsters, as I call them, to turn people into animals. Because if you had gone to Israel 5 or 6 years ago and you had walked the streets of Tel Aviv, you would have seen, quote, normal, regular people, regardless of the fact of what you thought of their policies and politics. You would not look at them and say, 5 years from now, that man is going to be using babies for target practice. They're going to be throwing grenades. They're going to kill more journalists in 2 years than was killed in the preceding wars, including World War I, II, Vietnam, all the places in the world. No one could imagine that. So how does that happen? It happens because governments decide to dehumanize others, to get the general population to a point where they can say, oh, well, they're all bad. Killing them is the right thing to do. And how I killed them, the more brutal, the better. Maybe it'll teach them a lesson. Maybe they'll leave. But, that is what the anti-fascist war was about. Majority of people, over 84% of the people killed in China were not military. A lot of them were killed because, when the Japanese came, they looted everything. They took all the food. They took the medicines. And therefore, many people died because they could not get what they needed in terms of prolong their life, and they just couldn't eat. But many others, like in the rape of Nanjing, were forcibly killed brutally. Men tied up together and then used for bayonet practice. Women raped, children raped, killed. I mean, this was things. So you got to ask your questions. If you went to Japan, you wouldn't look at them today and say, oh, these are the kind of people who would do that. So somebody did that, and that's fascism. That is the real danger in the world today. So why am I talking about this in terms of the military parade? China was referred to as the sick man of Asia because it was easily conquered. We had a few hundred troops who marched into Beijing and burned the Summer Palace. Right? They were able to force drugs onto China because their thirst for tea was such that they didn't want to pay for it in silver anymore. So they dehumanized everybody, took what they wanted, killed. This was standard practice. And this wasn't just Japanese. The Japanese learned it from who? From the Europeans, from Americans. Take what you want, industrialize, have the better weapons. Guy with the better weapons wins. So what China was showing to the world is that it is capable of defending itself, that it will not be taken over by a bunch of drug runners who are intent on delivering poison to their people, nor will it be subjugated by some sort of imperial doctrine, whether it's from Japan or America, that will make their people subservient, make them less than human. So very, very different messages depending on which side you're on. Clearly, being here, I covered the parade in Guangdong, so I had the opportunity to talk to people down there. I live in Beijing. I've been talking to people here, and I can tell you that There's nobody who isn't proud of the fact that they will no longer be subjugated. And this is transferring into a lot more confidence. I mean, on one side, Beijing said no to Donald Trump, and there's nothing he can do about it. He needs those rare earths. He sends out threats on, every other couple of days saying, I'm going to put a 200% tariff on China unless they give me the magnets. I mean, I don't know does he think he's in a shop somewhere where he can threaten somebody, some sort of mafiosa type of thing? But the fact is he doesn't have the rare earths, and it would take 10 to 15 years in order to create the processing facilities at the purity levels that would be necessary for commercial consumption. So he's over a barrel with them. So that was something a first, where China stood up and said, no, we're not going to be pushed around. Then you have this military parade, where it's clear that militarily China won't be pushed around. So right now, many Chinese people feel that they're more secure than they have. Is the economy here perfect? No, not by far. The global, these tariffs are affecting the whole global environment. GDP, as it goes down, Chinese businesses suffer, as do businesses around the world, and including the United States. I mean, Governor of Nebraska called Trump personally. He said, you're about to witness the largest number of bankruptcies in our history because you took away our markets. Right? What do you, I thought you were going to help us. And Trump gave him some, I'll give you some of that tariff money. He's literally taking money from one pocket and deciding who he'll put it into in terms of the people he took it from. I mean, this is nonsense. Anyway, so when you start looking at this military parade and when people want to talk about, what can that do? I see that as nonsense. I've looked at each of those weapon systems, and I tell you the takeaway you should have from it is that China is keeping up with technology. They have systems for drones, anti-drones, and they have missiles, which is the shape of the future. We have seen in a number of conflicts from Azerbaijan to Ukraine, what's been happening in Israel, what's been happening in other parts, that warfare has changed dramatically. It's no longer about tanks. It's no longer about aircraft carriers and things like that. Unmanned aerial vehicles are cheaper, much easier to maintain, and they can be used almost anywhere. They don't need long takeoffs or things like this. And missiles. Missiles can reach, especially with hypersonic capabilities, can reach targets, and they cannot be defended against current. So that's where modern warfare is going. China has shown that it has the ability to protect itself, that it's staying relevant, and that this is something that is giving a lot of confidence to the Chinese people. Now, there's always a danger that they follow the U.S. and try to say, since we're more powerful, we will use our power to gain and extract things from others. That's why I think the SCO, BRI, and BRICS are very important, because they signal the exact opposite. That China, despite having its economic and military power, is saying, we need a world that's inclusive, that is sustainable, that benefits all.
Yeah, well, I know you referred to the drugs from the opium wars, which then led to the century of humiliation, which is very important still in the historical memory of China. Again, but it's also, I guess, for many, it's almost a reasonable assumption that something like this could be tried to be played out again, because as we now see, reaching a situation where the United States is no longer capable of competing against China, some of the same thoughts appears to be reoccurring. That is, the efforts to break China economically. When this isn't working, it's becoming more and more common to speak about the warfare with China. as the natural escalation if economic warfare doesn't succeed. So anyways, all the talk appears to be, when they look at the rise of China, is how can we prevent it or break it. We hear very, very little about how to learn to live next to China as an equal. So given this rhetoric, yeah, the modernization of the Chinese army then appears to be rooted a bit in common sense as well.
Well, Len, I mean, the thing that really bothers me is that it's not about settling. In America, we have assets, and Europe as well, in terms of our education. You know, the new productive forces out there are rely on human resources. And that means universities, smart people, gathering them together, new ideas. I mean, the digital revolution is changing productivity, right? You don't need as many people, and people see that as a threat, but they shouldn't. If there is the kind of productivity that's out there, people can work less and still enjoy very, very happy lives. I mean, in America, less than 2% of the population is involved in agriculture. And yet, America can grow more food than it can consume itself. That's a productivity. That means that you don't have to have large masses of your people involved in that. If you do the same thing with manufacturing, it doesn't, the type of manufacturing jobs go away, right? But guess what? That productivity remains. And it allows you to have shorter work weeks. You could have a situation where you have 3.5-day work weeks. Everybody works. The economy goes on 7 days a week. You just work 3.5 days, and then somebody else works the other 3.5 days. And you can still enjoy more life, and you have more opportunity to spend, which helps the consumption economy. I mean, there are many, many opportunities out there, and yet all I see is the kind of negative stuff. The US, Europe have so much to offer. It's not a question of settling. It's a question of recognizing the realities, the opportunities. Remember, I talked about what is creativity? It's seeing opportunities where others see obstacles. And this is what really bothers me. If I see a set world in which I see no future, it will lead to conflict. But if I can change it around and creatively look and say, hey, I mean, there are incredible opportunities out there. I just need to be ready to take them on. Wow, what a difference that would make. And I think that mindset, and it's being pushed by a lot of people, and say, no, this is a zero-sum game. We win or they win. There's no two winners. This is something that has to change if we're going to maintain peace. And I completely agree with you. You know, China has been long concerned that the US would turn to the military option as they have in the past, as they did against China. And that's why you saw this parade, why they were willing to. Most countries like to keep their military secrets under wraps. Why? Because they don't want to show their true capabilities in case there is conflict. In this case, China showed pretty much as it had. And it's a signal to everybody, don't come looking at, don't think of us as a soft target.
Well, thank you so much for your insights on this. It's
I don't have insights. I talk too much, but
yeah. Well, it is incredible the extent of changes which is happening. I was thinking mostly, the economic sphere, but the world is spinning ever faster, it seems. And in terms of the tendency only to see threats rather than opportunities, I am convinced that that the core of the problem is that we locked ourselves into this notion that the hegemonic peace, that as long as there's one dominant state, there won't be great power rivalry. There will be the one with the good values will be able to set the rules for the system. You know, that this is the ideology of the liberal hegemon, which we haven't really divorced ourselves from. But again, from my perspective, even if one buys into the ideology of the liberal hegemon or not, or that argument, one still has to recognize reality as it is. And reality is the world is multipolar. It has a multipolar distribution of power. So it is necessary to make peace with that reality if you want peace in the world. So,
conflict or cooperation, it's a choice.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, thank you again, and I look forward to having you on again in the future if you're free.
It's always an honor. Thank you.
Thanks.